So hi everyone, and welcome to this video on music and music therapy in inclusive education. My name is Caroline. I am a student teacher with the University of Lethbridge. And this next 10-minute video is just going to give you kind of a brief overview of music therapy and how it can be used in the context of an inclusive classroom environment. Especially for students with emotional or behavioral disabilities. From hereafter, I'm going to refer to that as EBD. And it's worth noting, actually, that music therapy, it's just such a broad concept, and it can include a whole range of different attitudes and approaches. But for the purposes of this informational video, we're just going to be focusing on its use within inclusive classrooms. And I also wanted to apologize right off the bat. I'm not the best when it comes to technology or video editing, so I am going to try and just film this in one take. There might be a couple of slip-ups, so bear with me. Just meant for this to be a fun and informational video. So I want to jump right in here and give you guys an example of what can be considered music therapy. So I'm going to ask you to maybe sit back in your seat, and then I'm going to read you today's newspaper headline. So, you know, news, not the best. So today's headline was, "Looney touches 11-year low as crude prices sink." All right, so that's your news headline. And I want for you to either think of or write down one word that you would use to describe how you're feeling after hearing that news headline. So I'll give you maybe a couple seconds here. The word that I came up with was difficult. That was kind of just a gut reaction to that particular headline. So if everybody's got their word, I'm now going to ask you to sit back, maybe close your eyes, and just listen to the song. Okay, so if your eyes are not open, you can open them now. And what I would ask you to do after having experienced that little piece of music would be to come up with another word to describe your kind of emotional state after. And then I would get you to look at your starting word and your second word. And that would be kind of how you would open up discussion about, you know, emotions and feelings, and that's kind of how music is used to facilitate these kinds of emotional discoveries. And this example is obviously a bit contrived. That headline probably didn't, you know, stress you out too much. It's obviously a very limited example, but just wanted to start off with, you know, how simple an experience of music therapy can be. It can be as simple as, you know, listen to this song and explain how you're feeling before and after. And actually, yeah, this is kind of a good place to pop in the definition of what music therapy is. One of the simplest ones that I came across was using musical experiences to improve psychological functioning. So in this context, for this video, it would be, you know, emotional and behavioral regulation for students. And in my research, I discovered that music therapy is most strongly influenced by behavioralist theory. So this is where we see, you know, stimulus response, using music to either, you know, reinforce or decrease or modify certain behaviors. So behavioralist theory is one strong pillar of music theory, but also psychoanalytic theory, which is just basically using music to explore and gain more awareness about your emotions and your behaviors ultimately. So with music therapy, it's important to recognize that the music itself is kind of what you would call the central agent of the experience, but the focus of the therapy is just on the type of response that the music can elicit. So at the same time that it is kind of the central focus, it's also the goal is to see the response, not the music itself. So a bit of a paradox there. But I'm going to actually just show you another example here of a type of activity that could be used in an inclusive classroom. This one would probably work at a fairly low grade level. And I got this activity out of the book Music for Special Kids by Pamela Ott. It actually has a lot of great suggestions on how to incorporate music therapy in elementary level classrooms. So I'll just give you another example here of a type of activity that you could perhaps carry out in your own classroom. So I would ask my students to go to an open kind of shared space if there's a carpet, and get them to sing and dance along to the following song. If you're happy and you know it, dance around. If you're happy and you know it, dance around. If you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it, if you're happy and you know it, dance around. And so while I would be playing that, I would be asking the students to dance around as if they're happy, so responding to the emotion that was addressed in the song. I might then ask students, who can give me another example of an emotion that you want to dance to? So you could do, if you're angry and you know it, dance around, and you'd have to, how would you dance angrily? So that was kind of another brief example of a little activity that you could use. And you can see that something like that might not take more than a few minutes, but it's a really simple activity that shows you the real power of music therapy. So with a little activity like that, you can see that students are, one, sustaining focused attention on a specific activity, two, exploring self-expression. How are they going to dance? They're interacting with their peers in this kind of shared classroom environment. They're processing cognitively as they consider, well, how do I represent this emotion physically? And language skills, obviously, with singing for lower level elementary classes can be hugely, hugely helpful. So, there are 5, examples of what this type of musical experience would be eliciting from these younger students. And I think this activity also highlights one of the biggest strengths of music therapy, and that is that it's just inherently, fun, creative, and inviting. People they're drawn to music, they want to participate. And this actually means that children or youth who may be less inclined to want to participate in any kind of therapy might be more inclined to engage with something like music therapy because it is so fun and inviting and kind of non-threatening. So music therapy obviously capitalizing on this kind of emotional potency and universal appeal of music. Another huge strength that I would just mention here is that it's so adaptable. You can really tailor the experience of music therapy to suit whatever goal or needs you may have, whether this is interpersonal skills, self-expression, emotional awareness, communication. The list really does go on and on. There are endless ways to incorporate music therapy to different ends, basically. For children with EBD especially, music therapy is shown to really improve communication skills, their emotional regulation or affect regulation, as well as social functioning, as that example could show you. And this kind of real adaptability means that there are no real restrictions. So like physically, emotionally, cognitively, really doesn't matter. You can use it in such a wide variety of circumstances. That being said, with any great type of therapy, there are a couple of considerations of how it might be limiting. And so the first is, in this context, obviously, the relationship between participants. So in this case, it's going to be teacher-student in the context of an inclusive classroom environment. So that type of relationship will affect what people get out of the music therapy experience. You also have to consider emotional maturity, or just maturity generally. Obviously, that last example wouldn't have worked very well in maybe a secondary level classroom. So just a bunch of contextual variables that are not necessarily disastrous, but they just mean you have to consider how well everything's going to work in specific contexts. And I think I got a fairly typical reaction from my own father when I told him I was writing a paper on music therapy. And his response was quite skeptical, quite, this type is, no, it's not substantial enough. It's kind of like a floofy type of science. And I think that his reaction is quite indicative of, broader attitudes more generally to music therapy. People kind of see it as this, unscientific, overly artsy, kind of too much emotion, not enough science. And in a sense, this is kind of valid in that music therapy, it doesn't lend itself well to kind of like objective science-based reporting. So to this end, outcomes and goals can be difficult to measure objectively. This is not always the case. For example, if you were working with children with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, and you're wanting to encourage spontaneous speech through music therapy, it would be possible to do this and also to track instances of spontaneous speech. So that would be an example of where you can record and track outcomes quite specifically. There are other instances, however, where it's just going to be a lot more difficult to actually measure emotional or behavioral outcomes that you're wanting to. So I'll give you an example of a scenario where it would be more difficult. This was also in the book by Pamela Ott. And this would be in a kindergarten class where children are being asked to beat on a drum in time to music. So over time, a child that could only maybe once play really loudly and kind of only one tone, he might learn to play more lightly and with more self-control. But this may only happen over a long period of time. It may only happen slightly. So while that would kind of demonstrate this child learning kind of self-regulation and how to observe and interact in this kind of environment, it would be a lot more difficult to objectively say that this child has had an improvement from this type of music therapy. And it doesn't mean that children are getting less out of it. It just means that this particular model doesn't work very well when it comes to objective recording and measuring outcomes. So in the past, music therapy programs in schools have actually been turned down around issues of measurability. Administration is not going to want to implement a program where the risk is higher that you will not be able to point to certain objectives or outcomes. And to this end, as I was researching, one of the most common suggestions that authors were giving was record, record, record. If you're going to try out any type of music or music therapy in a classroom, you're going to want to be able to demonstrate its success. So recording with audio recordings or even filming the experience, they say any opportunity you have to do this helps to kind of boost the, not credibility, but be more able to demonstrate that it is an effective type of therapy if you have this documented video evidence. And that seemed to be a really common theme throughout most of the readings that I went through. So I'll just end this off saying that I personally have quite a bit of experience with music, but very, very little experience with what is actually formal music therapy. And writing this paper was actually, I'm so intrigued and I would love to learn more about it. And thankfully I'm going to be in a grade 1 classroom come January, so I'm really excited to try some of these activities out in that context. And I just think that, music therapy has such an emotional potency that you can't really get through other experiences. And in that sense, it's helpful for everyone. It's not just for, children or students with emotional or behavioral disabilities. It's for everyone, and every classroom, I think, can benefit from this type of universal intervention. So I want to thank you for sticking with me through this video. I'm going to include a list of all the readings and resources that I used in the description box below. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions or would like to know more about anything that was discussed in this video. I might not have all the answers, but I would love to find them out with you. Great, bye everybody.